as first-time GAs. They started 2 years ago. They just finished up their 2-year stint under helping us out. I would say underneath me, basically working with me. They'll give a little bit more into themselves, but we're grateful and blessed to have them here. And they've been finishing masters and finishing certifications, and they still had time to go ahead and put this together. So for no more ado, Logan and Kaley.
Sweet. Hello everybody. Like he said, I'm Kaley. Me and Logan are going to be talking about starting strength for middle school all the way through high school and how we should maybe frame that and look at that when we're building that out in a program. So, overview and kind of goals of what we're going to learn in this presentation. We're going to talk about what strength even is, frame that well, and then go into different training ages or quote ages of our kids. That's going to give, as coaches, a better framework of how to cater more to them and their abilities depending on those, and then go through a model of youth training all the way through your more advanced kids in high school, as well as basic movement patterns that we need to be proficient in, and how to progress those in ways that maybe we haven't really thought about. And then lastly, we will end it with an example of what that program could look like for you in your settings and a little bit of summary and takeaways. So goal today is to come in with like an open mind and think a little bit differently about what we're doing and how we're training these kids. So first, we'll introduce ourselves. He kind of already did, but I'm Kaley. Just got my master's CSCS certified, and hopefully I just sat for the SCCC, so waiting for those results as well. Most recently, just finished my grad assistant here at Belmont, working with volleyball and women's tennis. Before that, spent a year and a half interning at the University of Alabama in their weight room, working with a bunch of teams, volleyball, softball, cheer, golf, track and field. And then before that, interned a little bit on the PT side of things, looking at the recovery. That's kind of where I wanted to start going into in my college career, but ended up interning at Bama and completely decided to go all in here. And I also, for 2018 through undergrad, was a volleyball skills coach back in Birmingham, where I'm from. So.
And then, like Coach Lee said, my name's Logan. Just graduated from Belmont with my master's in education. I also have my SECC and my CSCS. Most recently, got my master's and did my graduate assistant stint here for the last 2 years. My main teams were women's soccer, men's women's golf, and our cheerleading team. We both assisted with basketball and then track and field as well. Before that, I got my undergrad at Washington State, was an intern there from 21 to 23, working with both the football and Olympic side, so baseball, golf, and volleyball as well. And then my intro to this field was, I was a PT aide for 2 years in a private practice, getting to work with general pop and athletes as well back home. So it's kind of my background. Real quick, going over definitions of what is strength. So a couple we pulled for y'all from the NSCA: the ability for muscle groups to exert maximal force against resistance. You can also lump athletes as a whole, as an organism in there, the ability to produce force against resistance, whether it's gravity, an external load, anything you wish to use. From NASM, the ability of the neuromuscular system to generate internal tension to overcome external force. A little bit more layman's terms, a little bit more scientific. But then, are we really limited to these definitions in our understanding? Meaning, is this what we're limited to when we talk about the strength of our athletes, especially youth training, kids who are brand new to the weight room? And so I want to ask y'all real quick. Take a freshman. Do they necessarily need a 1 rep max back squat? All right, there we go. So,
do we have any yeses?
I was going to say, who says yes, who does test their freshmen for stuff like this? Or young kids?
Cool, so everyone's on the no train.
All right, awesome.
All right, cool, let's move on. So the answer to that question, which y'all already are kind of leaning more towards what we're going to talk about anyway, which is great. The answer to that question really lies more in our ages. So each person in this room technically has 3 ages. You have, first I'll start in the middle with our chronological age. That's the number of years you've been on this earth. That's how old you are. If you want to look at it with your kids more of like a grade by grade perspective, that would be like your 7th grader versus your 12th grader. So, very simple there. You can make some like differentiations just generally based off of that. So like obviously your 7th grader is going to be a lower training age and biological age, but there's a little more that goes into that where you can compare person to person. So I'll start with biological age. Definition: the age of an athlete's cells, tissues, structure, and their hormonal function, which that piece is very important as well. And this is a marker of functional capacity, and it's very highly influenced by like their personal genetics and their lifestyle, what they've been up to before you ran into them. And then lastly, which is very most relevant for our field and coaching in the weight room, is training age, which is the accumulated time an athlete has spent under a consistent methodical training plan. So what have they been exposed to? Who's trained them? How proficient are they in basic movement patterns, which we'll cover later. So all of this is going to paint a big picture of how you should train the individual. So that's what we look at, even with my college kids. They come in, if I have a freshman, I know they're a freshman, so I can already kind of put that chronological age on them and kind of expect like generally what I'm going to get. From there, once they come in that biological age, how developed are they? So in y'all's setting in high school, I'm sure all of you have seen, so you might have 2 10th graders, 2 males, one pretty small still, not very, doesn't have a lot of mass. Then you've got, there's always that one sophomore kid who's like 6'3", huge, he's got a beard already, like they're the same age chronologically. They may even have the same training age, but one of them is going to be more advanced biologically, so you're going to be able to do a little bit more with that athlete potentially. So that's kind of what we're looking at here. Next slide.
So then once we've gotten that assessment of where our athletes are at, however you wish to do that, or just the coach's eye of where our kids are, looking at training goals before we move into the model that we want to show y'all from the development side, especially with our younger kind of late middle school, early high school kids. Do they have postural control? Are they bandy on ice? Are they going through puberty? Have they grown 3 inches in the last year? Do they have control of their limbs and their body in space? Can they balance 2 feet, 1 foot? Do they have the coordination to do the tasks you're asking them to do, whether it's basic weight room movements, whether it's on the field? Once they have that coordination, can they execute the movement with sound mechanics and technique, whether it's the pattern and sequencing on a squat, on running, whether their gait is on lock where you want it to be, and then have they been exposed to enough different patterns, tempos, and intent to where we're comfortable with them in the weight room and on the field. From the development markers, looking at performance, the general things, the KPIs we all want to increase in our kids: speed, strength, explosiveness, mobility, flexibility, access to those different range of motions and position, putting the development markers first and then performance second. And we're going to show you how we chart that out. So here's a model we came up with, thinking about developing young kids, especially with what we've seen coming into college. For example, my women's soccer team, everybody had a training age of 0 when I ran into them, and so we had to prioritize the low-hanging fruit first. And this is going to be our bottom block. As we increase from the biggest part of the pyramid to the top, we're looking at our progressions of patterns, loading, the complexity of what we're asking them to do, as well as the total load on their system. So with what we're calling our beginners, the neurological, where we're just getting them to learn, get better access to their body and their muscles. Looking at mechanics first, again, that posture, coordination, and balance, as well as the exposure to what we're asking them to do. Movement patterns, tempo, different coaching cues. Have they heard the different things? Do they know what it means when they're asking them to send their hips back, to load up this muscle, to generate tension in these different groups? From there is a gradient in each of these red lines. You're going to have a bulkier population here. There's going to be some kids that are kind of transient between 1 and 2, same thing between 2 and 3. But that next skill development group is going to be, we can load them a little bit more, whether it's starting to introduce external load, whether it's using gravity at a more disadvantageous angle, so they have to fight their body weight more. But we're looking to advance the loading and then the patterns as well. So if we've done everything bilateral, we're going to ask them to do single leg. We're going to change the surface they're standing on, but make it a little bit more complex without putting a ton of external load on them. After we get through this middle block, fully confident in the athlete, moving up to our structural hormonal, where we're looking at our older training age, our older biological age. Can we put a barbell on them and do percent work? So we're trying to get the adaptations to the muscles, to the skeletal system, to induce that traditional like 85% or higher strength work is what we're looking at there. As well as starting to use velocity training and the more traditional strength and conditioning programs that we might see in college or the later high school years. So building that first base of the pyramid with movement and exposures to all these things, then the skill learning, and then hitting that peak of the program up there.
Awesome. So now, keeping that in mind, we might revisit that model in a second, but going through some of our basic patterns of movement that we need to have strength in. So I will start with the lower body portion. A squat. A squat's going to be knee dominant. We're flexing at the hip, knee, and ankle. That could be body weight all the way up to front and back squat with a barbell. Goblet kind of in between. You can also squat unilaterally. So on a single leg, you're still flexing at the hip, knee, and ankle. It's still a knee dominant movement. But with this, it's going to be more of a split squat. So we're here, locked into that position, or a pistol squat if you have someone with really good mobility who is able to do that. Or a step down, which is more universal, like anyone could do that movement. Moving on to a hinge. This is going to be our hip dominant movement, a lot less knee involvement, focus on the posterior chain, so that's going to be our like glutes, hamstrings. Starting on the bilateral end of things, an RDL, where we're hinging, we're holding weights, keeping them close to our body. You could lock someone in a position with their feet and their upper back if they struggle with that, with a hip thrust. Or if they're advanced, you can move on to a deadlift. And then unilaterally, same thing, we can also hinge on one leg. Makes it, you have either one, you have to depend a little bit more on your balance, your coordination, and a lot more of those like small supporting muscles. With a single leg RDL or a single leg glute bridge. And then finally our lunges, very similar to a unilateral movement except it's more dynamic. So your center of mass is shifting and you need to be able to control your body throughout that range and back to the center. So this is something that everyone or every athlete should be able to do. Even if someone's really good at a split squat where their center of mass is still, sometimes, and I've seen it with some of my like training age 0 kids, they'll be like, great, let's do a lunge now. And they're like wobbling like Bambi trying to get back and their knees are coming into the middle. So it's a separate thing that we need to spend some time on so that they have a good base for their sport. Their center of mass is changing all the time while they play their sport. So, and he'll take that body.
Upper body, looking at our push-pulls. So we're splitting it into our horizontal and vertical movements. For the pressing, as simple as a push-up. How many coaches in here have kids who like to do push-ups like this and do the head banging thing? All of us, it doesn't go away in college. Let me tell you, I have a lot of kids who still like to do that, so we worked hard to fix it. From push-ups all the way up to different implements with bench press, dumbbell, barbell, single arm, however you wish to progress it, into our vertical presses, whether barbell, dumbbell, even if it's just a band around the wrist to engage the majority of the shoulder girdle and the delts, into a single arm landmine or a barbell. Then for our pulling, horizontal, starting with a ring row where your feet are pretty far back, you aren't finding that hard against gravity, cable row, dumbbell row. Vertical, cable or band pull down or any object where you're taking a smaller percentage of their body weight, working more of the lat. And to our pull-ups, chin-ups, adding eccentrics in there, or if you have a kid who's progressing far enough, overloading their body weight because they're strong enough to handle it.
So taking these basic patterns, we need our athletes to be proficient in all of those. So if you're looking at starting, let's rewind a little bit. If we're looking at the overarching goals of a year, of their entire time with you, of their week to week, that's where we split it up into, these are some little scientific terms, our macro cycle, our mesocycles, and our microcycles. So think of your macro cycle, that's the biggest. Traditionally, macro cycle is your year training plan. So where are they coming in? How are we starting? Where do you want them at the end of the year? And I feel like as coaches, even us sometimes, like we can lose sight of like the end of year goal and kind of get really bogged down in these mesocycles, but these should always be supporting your main goal. So if I have a kid, for example, I'm thinking, okay, they're on a body weight squat. That's what they can do right now, that's what I'm working with. I want them by the end of the year to be proficient in a goblet squat with a decent amount of load. So that'd be my goal for my athlete over the entire year. Mesocycle is going to be more week to month ranges of your programs with your shorter term goals in mind. So maybe using the same example, you have a block, couple weeks to a month block where you're working on, all right, let's get them from body weight eccentrics to either, depending on their training age and how they're doing with that, that's where you have to use your coaching eye to see like, how are we progressing? Are they ready for this next step or not? If they are, maybe getting them from a wobbly body weight eccentric to maybe that first week of a goblet, or maybe it's just great control eccentric to a target, or maybe lowering that target. So that would be your shorter term goal to eventually get them to your big goal by the end of the year. And then your microcycles are your day-to-day programs. Your day-to-day programs are designed to elicit a specific response that you're looking for in that day. So your week is gonna have days that are focused on different things. Maybe one day we're focusing on, let's get better at our squat. One day we're focusing on our upper body. Maybe one day you're focusing on just more balance, coordination, change of direction kind of stuff. That's where that comes into play. So breaking that down into our basic training patterns or our movement patterns. Example of a squat progression, like I kind of mentioned, all of these are going to kind of take that macro cycle point of view of where I would want a kid from, say they come into me as a freshman, this is where I want them to end up by their senior year. Whether or not they're going to play in college or not, if they're just going to go into life, being able to go forward, be comfortable in a gym, be comfortable training, and have good foundation of movement patterns so they don't get hurt. Or whether you're sending them to us, so they come in and we're like, awesome, we have a great base, we can go right into what we need to do without having to kind of draw it back. So for example, with a squat progression, maybe this person, they've never trained a day in their life, they're a little wobbly, they just had a growth spurt, they're doing body weight eccentrics, controlling through that whole range of motion, engaging their glutes, keeping their chest upright, keeping their core engaged throughout the entire movement. Once they kind of master that, and I'm like, you're good to go, adding a external load with a goblet squat, so where they're having to hold and support the weight in front of them without letting their chest fall. That's going to be a really important piece before we can move into axial loading, where we're putting a bar directly over their spine. Also, a little thing I'd like to keep in mind, and it seems like common sense, but I feel like a lot of times we're a little too quick to progress from goblet to a barbell movement. With a goblet, you can progress that weight as many dumbbells as you have and as much as they can hold that weight in front of them. You at the very least, have to be able to squat with 45 pounds to be able to do a barbell movement. So if you're looking to, say they get to 45 and you're like, great, you can go and do a barbell movement, you'd be stuck at 45. Does that make sense? So you need to have a little bit more cushion on that goblet squat before you can go into an axial load so that you can actually progress that movement as well. Vertical pull, one little caveat, your starting place for someone can be like a cable or a band pull down. That doesn't mean you can't use this with your more advanced athlete. It's a really good tool to use all of the time, but it's also a tool that your training age 0 kids can get a general grasp of, especially since they're not going to be able to pull their body weight. So moving from there into, if you're trying to get into your chin-ups or your pull-ups, a chin-up's going to be a little bit easier than a pull-up, a better position for them. So starting with some eccentrics, starting from the top, controlling all the way down. We have more capacity for strength in the eccentric than we do on the concentric portion of the movement. So working through that until we can get a chin-up, and then working on your actual chin-ups. And then from there, if you've got your more advanced group, say your seniors, they're banging chin-ups out, you can put weight on it. So weighted chin-ups. That would be kind of that macro cycle point of view there. And then your horizontal press, we mentioned before, push-ups seem like a great starting point, and it is. but usually we're gonna have to even scale it back further. So again, push-up eccentrics. A lot of kids love this little elbow flare-out situation. It's horrible. But keeping it tucked, keeping your lat engaged, keeping your elbow at 45 degrees for the entire way down. If you need to drop your knees to get back up, that's fine, but we controlled it all the way down. Then once we have that, we can move into a push-up. If that looks great, we're good to go. They have that base. We can go into a dumbbell bench. Same concept as the goblet. You gotta be able to at least push 45 to get to a barbell, and you need to be able to add weight on top of that, usually, for a training plan there. So working through your dumbbell bench till we're proficient, we have stable shoulders, we have great engagement, and then going into your barbell bench for your more advanced athletes. So this is where I would want people, again, training age 0 to like training age 4. I want to be able to do all of these things with my final year people.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
So what determines the progression to move from one stage to the next? Is it the weight that they can do, or technique, or?
That's kind of where, like I mentioned earlier, that's where we have to be coaches. So it's a little bit of everything. So how much weight can they do with it if they are in the weighted portion, but also how well are they doing that weight? So if I give an athlete, here's a 40-pound goblet squat, but they went from doing a squat really well to looking kind of bad and like wobbly and their core's losing engagement and everything, I might take that weight back. So that's just where you have to use your discretion a little bit on what are you ready for. Have you graduated, or do you need to stay here, or do we need to scale it back? Does that answer your question at all?
First off, I want her biceps. I'm not sure where she found this picture,
Yeah,
but
she's
I'm
jacked.
kind of
I
jealous of
included that because I was like,
So with this progression, might seem a little overwhelming if you got a big group of kids, or there might be some kids in the gray area. So this is a software we use called Team Builder, if you're not familiar with it. If I have my 3 ability groups, so our learners, our skill development, our kids who can handle the percentage, this is how we can run the same lift, the same patterns, but with different implements in the same room. So you're not crowding all around the dumbbells, you're accommodating all these kids and where they're at. So same lift, same intent, same patterns, but we're at a different progression point for each of our groups. So we have an eccentric block. Let's say this is our off season. Don't judge the actual program. We would have more in here, it'd be more fleshed out. But even onto our jumping, for our neurological kids, I want to just see them skip. I mean, generally we know kids don't spend as much time on the playground, they're not playing as much games, so I want to see that basic pattern. Can you skip? Can you squat? And can you jump out of that squat? So we have an eccentric here. Can you load down, get out, and the reset between reps? I'm going to have them start with a bodyweight squat. All of our kids are doing 5-second eccentrics, but they're going bodyweight, band around knees to cue, knees out, use that glute med. Hinge, I'm going to start with a glute bridge, same band around knees. Can they use their glutes and then bridge all the way up, keeping the full foot in the floor and their core engaged. Ring rows, starting their feet well behind the rings. Gravity's not fighting them as much. Keep their core tight in that straight line from the ankle to the shoulder. Rowing, squeezing the shoulders back, control down. And then I'm going to start our neurological group on the push-ups on a box. Take gravity out of it a little bit, elbows tight, still that 5 seconds on the way down. Same lift, but moving to our middle group, I'm going to have them doing pogos, similar to a jump rope, but without the implement. Can they do that basic rhythmic hop on and off the floor? Can you take the eccentric out of a squat? Squat jump, get down quick, get out fast. For the squat, we're going to move to a goblet. So at this point, they've demonstrated the control in that body weight. They can move well. They know how the joints are supposed to move. I'm going to give them that external load. For this athlete, they may need their heels on the wedge. Maybe their ankles are a little tight, so we're going to accommodate for that. And we're still doing the same 5 seconds down on all these movements. For the hinge, one tool we like to use in our progression is a hip-banded kettlebell RDL. You take the band around the pelvis, it's anchored to the rack behind them. That weight is in between their feet naturally. The band is going to pull them back as a cue to introduce that standing hinge, drive up against the band, and it forces them to squeeze their glutes on the top. Kind of is that bridge to a standard barbell RDL. Then we're going to a barbell inverted row. It's anchored into the hooks. We're using almost all of their body weight that they have to pull against gravity. They're in a plank underneath the barbell with their hands on it, row up, touch their chest to the bar, 5 seconds on the way down. And then now we're going push-ups on the floor, 3 sets, as many as you can with a 3-second eccentric. So now we are still building the skill, but also touching on capacity as well. For our most advanced kids, we're gonna take that pogo, we're gonna have them hop on a single leg, we're gonna have them jump to a target, so now they've progressed out of our body weight vert jumps. They're gonna land softly in the middle of the box. We're adding that complexity or that second stage of the task. We're gonna give them a front squat, so progressing from the goblet, our weight's already out here. Let's put it on their spine, use the shoulders a little bit, still 5 seconds on the way down. Standard barbell RDL, we're gonna give them a seated cable row. Here, trying to emphasize that upright posture. You have access to kneeling, standing, sitting, whatever posture you want them in or whatever orientation. But there's also a chance to overload this to more than they might pull on both arms. If you give them close to body weight on a single arm, you can progress that as much as you want. And then starting with a dumbbell bench press. So same patterns, horizontal pull, horizontal push, hinge, squat, jump, but different implements, different stages for all these kids that we're working with. So from that, a couple takeaways. While we have a definition for strength, it's contextual based on what the age of our athlete is. Is it their ability to sit to a chair and stand up? Is it the ability to perform a push-up on the way down? It's different from kid to kid, whether you're chasing a 1 rep max and you're doing percentage work, or whether you just want them to function better as a human being, as an athlete. Not chasing numbers too quickly. Y'all kind of took care of that with the we don't 1 rep max freshman, so thank you for that. And then the one request and kind of goal as on the collegiate side is to build that quality foundation so that when they get to their next stage, whether it's life, whether it's a collegiate team, if you got a 5-star recruit or some kid who just wants to lift weights, build that base of the pyramid so they're better set up when you get the rest of the house, the rest of the structure stacked on top of it. Thank you.
Any questions?
Does anyone, do you have a question?
Yeah, I have a question.
Oh, okay.
Go for it.
So we're not gonna run 1 rep max freshman,
Yes, sir.
right? But what's a way we could get some sort of landmark to work out of, like we wanted to progress something?
Yeah, so can you go back to the pyramid actually?
Yeah.
I just like to have the visual. So like if you're working with this group, these kids who have like a training age of 0, maybe have not like hit puberty yet, they're not gonna be able to get up into the structural block up here. It might be, so if some of you may have, some of you may not have. If you've looked into like percentages of strength, 85% for example would be a strength percentage to work off of. If you don't have that percentage, say you have a kid who can do 10 body weight squats with a 5-second eccentric before they're like wobbling and they can't do it anymore. So you can kind of use that as a reference for what is 85% of that, just as an example. So if you're looking to get them up to that 85-90%, we have that marker of, I know they can do 10, they can't do 11. Then you can be like, all right, so if I'm programming for 85%, you're gonna do 8 reps this week. That's kind of how I would look at it from that perspective. Once you get into like goblet squat, you can kind of get like a gauge for a weight, and you can go off of what have they done in the past, what did it look like, how difficult was that last rep, and you can start kind of prescribing some load for them even with a goblet squat, even though it's not a huge number to work off of. Does that make sense?
Good job.
So are we translating, most coaches that are in here, are we translating better athlete to performing it correctly or by performing more weight?
Correctly.
Both.
A little bit of both.
You see what I'm asking? Because in order for me to, now everybody in here is the coaches.
Yep.
We want better athletes. We're trying
Correct.
to build better athletes. So
Yeah.
are we translating by looking at somebody and saying they're doing it correctly, but they're not lifting enough to actually get to where they're showing me that they're a better athlete? I may have a kid who's a really good athlete,
Yes.
but cannot do correctly a whole lot of stuff that y'all are putting up here that we're saying that we're moving.
Right.
So as a coach, how am I translating that in creating athletes for everybody?
Well, if you got your great mover on the field, like they're just naturally an athlete, they can get their foot on and off the ground, they have great change of direction, but you want access to the stuff to progress them, whether it's the complexity of jumps. You want them to hit their PR vert, whatever tool you want to use. This is our baseline for how to get them there. It's like I have kids where if I can get them to do a good clean pull or a power clean or be able to jump with weight and do these different protocols that we use, I know that would help them. But I don't trust that kid to throw a barbell over his head in a snatch yet. And so taking that progression of getting the basic patterns and not interfering with their athleticism, just make them a better mover all around, so that way we have access to the tools to develop the speed power that we want to.
And then I just also like to touch on something with this pyramid, kind of related, kind of not. It's very separated, but it's a gradient. Like, you might have one kid who has a different strength. Like, they're really good at squatting, but they are really bad at push-ups. You're gonna see a lot of that. Like, we still see that on the college end of things. So you may have a kid who's down here in this block, or maybe kind of on this line between the two with different movements. So they may be like, I'm good to go on the squat, we're goblet squatting, but I still can't do a push-up without elbows flaring and my back arching and my head tucking. So we're still doing eccentrics there. So that's where, like I mentioned earlier, we gotta use our coaching eye, because once they graduate in one thing, doesn't mean that they graduate in the other. So on your end of things, taking like their strengths and being able to progress those a little quicker, but working on the gaps where they need to like close. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and what I would say is that most of the time in coaches, we wanna jump faster. We wanna get,
Yeah.
we
We
wanna
do
go past what y'all got and get to where we're building up there at the top, and we have to be careful about that because we gotta back down to get that posture correctly and get them moving in the correct order.
Yeah.
Because we've only got them for a certain amount of years, and we know we're trying to build as fast as we can.
Yeah, and I'm gonna answer a little bit of that in my talk when I talk about like movement is king kind of deal, because we all would agree that the best ability is availability, right? So if a kid already has a athleticism that is allowing them to perform certain things on the field that other players can't do, well, we need to make sure that athlete is still available to do those things. And then we want to then take the weight room or change direction or speed work and complement the areas that they do have, like Coach said, and then try and like raise the floor a little bit, right? So like, what are some of the low-hanging fruit? What are some of the things they don't do? Well, they don't like standing on one leg. They don't like, calf raises. They don't like these certain things, right? So we want to try and bulletproof areas within the body that's going to become more susceptible to injury based off of their athleticism they do have, right? And then kind of continue those strengths, but not get so excited about the things that they do well and just push that lever so far forward that everything back here that's supposed to keep it safe or keep their body working optimally gets forgotten, and then we end up in these like really bad compensation patterns or have a higher probability of chronic issues later on. That makes any sense? Yes, sir.
So I have a question. I may have missed it. If I did, I apologize. So why not test the freshman in the squat max?
Really, and I'll let you touch on it too if you want to, but kind of going back to what I mentioned earlier, like if you have a freshman, usually if they've done any training at all, it would have been in middle school. So if they do have 2 years of training experience, they may already be kind of up in here a little bit where we could start getting some kind of number. But for our purposes, until we can do this stuff, it's not very necessary to have like, this is your all out effort and this is, you were failing out on this and this is my number. We can get a general number and range to work off of with any point in the progression. So putting a kid under that load and that stress when they're not ready for it isn't really necessary. If you had a freshman who's been training their whole life and they've been squatting and they look great and they have numbers, maybe that's something that you could do for that person. But usually that's not the case.
Yeah, I think
Gotcha. So it's more based off of experience and not age.
Yes, sir.
correct. Yeah,
Yes.
that's what we're talking about. So not necessarily chronological age, but training age. Like I think we've all probably seen that kid that walks through the door and they go, oh, like, we have those kids too, right? And so like you also want to make sure that you're providing the correct amount of stimulus. Because if that kid walks in and you're like, okay, do a bodyweight squat, and he's like, what am I doing? Like I've been training since I was 13 or 12 years old with my dad, and he moves when he has those things. Then put him in the varsity rack and make him go eat. Like But you've got to be able to evaluate that like on an individual basis. Does that make sense? And then the thing that we talked about, like scaling that 1 rep max, that's why I kind of asked that question, and you did a good job answering, was basically finding goals for individuals, for everyone in the weight room. Like, okay, no, you're not barbell back squatting, but you did 10. Can you do 12 in 2 weeks? Because you were shaking like a tree in the wind. I need you to be able to be sturdy like an oak and not have the wind moving. So that's why you're doing this and he's doing that, because I need you to make sure that foundationally you can do all those things, because this is supplemental to you being able to play the game, right? Like they're all technically involved in sport because hopefully they have a love for the game itself. Very few of them actually have a love for training, right? Like, and so we've got to find a way to get them to understand the value of training in their love for the game, and then hopefully that will then shift their mindset to having a love for training because it gives them a greater ability in the love of the game. That kind of makes sense. Good question.
Would you say that reps in reserve is a more viable measure than percentage-based training? Because I know, there's a lot of stuff in the air as to how good people are at judging their own reps in reserve, but well, I mean, especially when you have those lower level athletes mixed in with the higher level athletes, would you want to test the higher level athletes, have them doing percentage-based training, or would you rather have everyone be like, do 8 reps, keep 2 in reserve, do 4 reps, keep 1 in reserve, that sort of thing?
So,
I'm sorry.
So, at least on my side, I work with women's soccer. I've done both, and I mean it's collegiate level. But like I said, I had kids who had never lifted before. So, one of our kids, Lily, she's probably gonna get her bodybuilding pro card as soon as she graduates. She's just a little tank, but I could trust her to do a 1 rep max as soon as she walked in. For the most of the rest of my team, we do APRE, which is a version of reps in reserve, where you're gonna do a set of 8, a set of 10, to where it feels like this. And then you're going to go until you have 2 reps left. We'll adjust from there, and then you're going to go until you have X amount of reps left. So you can use both as long as it works into your system. I'm a fan of all of it. However, we can test our kids and get some kind of idea, whether it's body weight, how long can you go until 2 reps and your knees are kind of shaking. But short answer is absolutely. Long answer is you can apply it however you want to all your kids. Even with 20-something-year-olds, I'm like, okay, you can squat 360, you can squat 200 with some assistance, and so we're going to back it off a little bit and do a different model. But yeah,
and I also, like, with my teams here specifically, I have a lot of variety of ability and a lot of limitations for like other reasons and modifications. So I use reps in reserve a good bit, and I also use an RPE scale, so like their perceived exertion. But I've done the conversations and I've exposed them where like I'm standing right behind them and I'm like, you can do another one, where they know what it feels like. Because if you just give like, if I've never trained, I'm gonna go until it burns, and I'm gonna be like, yeah, that's like, I got like 2 left, but you have more than 2. So reps in reserve is great, I use it, but I need them to actually know what that feels like.
So to that point, if you're going to use like a reps in reserve, you could do some sort of test without like loading in that pushes them to that brink, where it's like, we're going to do body weight squats for time, as many as you can get, and you're going to go, and then you feel like you can stop, you can keep going, something like that, where you get them to understand the physiological capacity that they actually have is much greater than the psychological capacity to push to that space. Does that make sense? And that's where you really start to see some really cool things happen when it comes to training. But a lot of us have never really gotten there. If you have gotten there, you know what it feels like to feel like you only have 2 left. Like in your spaces, if you were going to use that, I would argue that you probably you're probably going to get minimal effective dose, maybe, but you might be leaving yourself a lot of low-hanging fruit in the sense of like training capacity of those individuals, because they just don't know. Like, it's one of those, like that other phrase I like to use, like, we don't know what we don't know, and they don't really know what it feels like to train. So if you're going to use that, you could also use an analogy. Maybe you've done a conditioning test or done some things that were really hard, right? And you could say, okay, remember when the conditioning test, you felt like you couldn't get another rep on the conditioning test? The weight room or this exercise needs to feel like that. So now they can associate to what that might feel like, even though they haven't technically been done that in the weight room. So it's kind of trying to find ways to connect those dots for the kids. And trust me, we're doing the same thing here. Good question.
Yes, sir.
With the macro cycle, I know on slide you had a year, is that technically like 12 months? Or can that be like a school year?
It could be like a
Semester.
school year. It would be like whenever they start to whenever they go home. So in y'all's case, if it was like high school, it'd be when they come, whether that be like end of summer to get ready for fall, through when they leave and have a break. Do you have something?
Yeah, I was gonna say, to that point, the cycle's gonna look a little bit different for each kid, because probably your kids are playing multiple sports, right? So they might, a kid comes in, they might do some cross country or some, maybe a little bit of soccer, and then they're gonna go play football, and then they're gonna run track, and then they might, do tennis, something like that. So your macro cycle might have all of those things in it. Like, okay, here's when they're in season here, here's where they're in season here, here's where they're in season here, and you look and you go, well, they're always in season, how do I train? Okay, well, what are some of the things that I can train in season in this sport that are going to be beneficial to this sport? And then what are some of the things I can train in season in this sport that are going to be complementary to this sport? And kind of work out of those spaces so that you fatigue the correct areas physiologically without having a detriment to their ability to perform in the in-season sport that they're technically competing in. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah.
So that's kind of.
Cool. Any other questions?
So with me being
Yes, sir.
in middle school, I have 6th, 7th, and 8th graders.
Mhm.
It would be smart for me to start at the bottom, regardless for all of them.
Unless you have
Most.
Because I do have some athletes.
Unless you have some dudes,
that
or some
can
chicks, or
really
some girls, like there's some
do it.
studs out there, either way, male or female.
Because I'm looking at the pyramid, it's basically with it broken 3.
Mm-hmm.
If I can try to at least have about 90% of my athletes to where they can at least put a bar on before the work. So when they get to freshmen, they're prepared.
For sure, and you've got a huge, if you do your job really well, it's gonna make the high school that much better. And
Yeah.
you won't see the fruits of your labor till you're maybe 4-6 years down the road, but if they're winning, they're going to regionals, winning state championships and having all this success, it's because you laid the foundation for that. Like that's kind of where the high school ranks come in for us. It's like, there's a lot that can get done in the middle school age.
Yeah, we're trying.
For sure, yeah.
We
But
have a way more like that, so we're definitely doing those things, but we're trying to get it closest to perfection as we can.
For sure.
Mhm.
So
I
that's
think-
why I'm here.
I think giving yourself grace and going like, okay, they can't do a power clean. Like, we're not doing heavy deadlifts. Like, that's fine. Because those things aren't technically what they really need at that moment. Like, if they're really good movers with minimal compensation patterns and no acute injuries by the time they get to high school, man, that's a gold mine. Now that you pass them off and now you start having those conversations with whatever high school, hopefully high school strength coaches that they're feeding into, and now they're going to be able to take what you've done and be able to do that. So that's
And
good.
can I add something?
Absolutely.
So going back to like biological age and training age, most likely, if I had to guess, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, your 6th graders have never trained, ever. Bambies. And then 7th grade to 8th grade. 8th grade, you can get a little close to here, probably, I would imagine, in this range. But they're not done developing either. So biological age-wise, hormonally, they're not developed to be able to, or I should say, need to really get up into this area. Where they're gonna see the most benefit before they've fully developed is gonna be with more like very basic movement patterns. How well can they balance? How well can they work through a range of motion? Do they have range of motion? Like that's where that kind of thing comes into play, so that while they're growing, we're not putting extra stress on their joints and their ligaments and everything. They're already having like growth spurts and stuff. So when we say like neurological, when we're at a training age of like 0 to 1, we're not gonna see a ton of mass put on or anything like that. You're probably not gonna see a ton of mass put on until later in high school. They're gonna be getting more coordination, more like mind to muscle connection, if you've heard that term, like being able to recruit the correct muscles to do the correct thing, which goes with what he's saying. Once they're in high school, they can recruit the muscles they need to, they can do things proficiently so that their high school people can work from here up. Then you've done a great job.
Yes, sir.
Alright, so might be showing my age here, but back
Go for
when I was in high school, there was a stigma around the kids who were lifting in middle school and whether or not it was detrimental to their development. Is there truth to that, or like a limit to what you want a kids to do at a certain age?
Structural,
So, current understanding, outside of any traumatic injuries, it hasn't been shown, again, prefacing with, if they're young enough, we want them to move well. But coming from a weightlifting background, doing a ton of work with the USAW, barbell and impact hasn't been shown to like slow down growth plate development or anything like that. So from the structural side, you're not gonna impede that kid's performance. But then you gotta go back and ask, like, yes, there was a stigma, there is still a little bit, but what are the goals with that? And so you might have a kid who moves really well and you trust him with the goblet squat and all this, but then he'll hit puberty because the plates are so low that he has another 2 inches of femur length and he doesn't know where his legs are underneath him. And so then you can kind of slide back and forth with that. But if we do our job well, no, and basically unless they get hurt and damage that structure, no.
Yeah, and there's actually been a lot of more research coming out, like for longevity, that you build this kind of durability through the tissue and your skeletal system when you're younger. So like you watch kids play, you go see a playground, they jump from way up here and they're landing on the ground. And those contact forces to the ground are crazy. We don't have any of our kids doing that type of stuff. So like you think about like what they're actually structurally capable of handling, it's a lot. The key is like the appropriate amount of structural stress in the space in which they're technically at from a growth perspective. So like Coach said, like if they're handling this stuff and then they look great one week and they come in the next week and you're like, who is that kid? Like you didn't know where it's right from his left. Okay, wait, he had a growth spurt, he had these things. What's really neat, and I don't think Harry will get into this, but there's a way that you can start to figure this out. There's an actual chronological to training age thing, and you can actually start to see when a growth spurt's going to happen. It's really cool. It's like he's been able to kind of figure some of that stuff out, and they're doing this at the pro level because when they're signing and looking for kids for like English Premier or national team kids in the soccer world, they're looking at kids from 10 to 12, and they're trying to see, okay, is he going to be 6'2", right? Like they want to know where his growth spurts are going to hit, and they're going to track those things. So I don't know if you put that in there, but he can.
I did, but it's called peak height velocity. If you want to look that up or write that down, that's the gauge. There's pretty good websites out there. Maybe if we send out like a follow-up email, I can put a link in there as well to resource for that as well.
Yeah, so that's kind of like another piece that you can kind of look at. So I think I hinder from saying that anything is good or bad. It's just like when we said like don't run rep max a freshman. Well, I mean it's relative. Like there's we're just trying to say okay, it in most often cases it's probably not the best idea, but it doesn't mean you can't do it and that there's not a kid that's capable of doing it. Like should middle schoolers lift weights? Maybe not, but it might look different. It's not technically good or bad. So there's a lot of kids that have been lifting since they were in middle school and they're fine, right? But they did it in a safe and controlled environment with great coaching and with keeping the first things first and not chasing a max power clean or snatch or something like that. So it's a good question.
Anyone else? Sweet.
Awesome. Hey, you did a great job.
Thank you.
Thank you guys.
Let's take like a 2-3 minute break if you need